All right, folks. You know the drill. Let us know. Hey, here we go, folks. You know the drill. Let us know. Can you hear us right now? And can you see us? Super professional broadcast mode here, asking if the viewers can actually hear and see us right quick. NASA Spaceflight is here today for another NASA Spaceflight Live, as we do just about every Saturday. But in chat, let me know that everything's 5x5. That's what I like to see over there. All right. Good deal. I see a bunch of 5x5s in chat, which is on the monitor over here when I break my neck in that direction. We're here today to do another live space news show like we do, like I said, every week. And we've got a very special guest with us today. Y'all give a very warm NASA Spaceflight Space Fam welcome to Eric Berger, the senior space editor at Ars Technica. Eric, how are you doing today?
I am doing fabulous. Happy to be here.
Excellent. So we have Eric here for the entire show. This isn't the sort of deal where it's like, oh, he's going to dial in for 5 minutes and make a statement and then leave. You're hanging out here the entire show, an hour and a half with us today, right? They told you that,
yeah.
Right? Okay.
A lot to talk about this week.
That was in the memo, allegedly. So good deal. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Eric. And then also we will have right here Chris Bergin, not the founder of NASA Spaceflight, just the guy who really likes the space shuttle. Is that okay? Can I introduce you that way, Chris?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Thank you.
All right, good. The guy who really likes the space shuttle. So today we've got a couple different things that we'll be talking about and covering. Of course, everybody wants to know what's happening with SN10. That will be coming up. SpaceX Boca Chica, definitely something we will be talking about, especially with Eric here, because Eric, you are an avid follower of SpaceX. I don't even know if that just gives it justice, right?
I track the company as closely as possible. Yeah, although, things move so fastly in Boca Chica, you find out information one day and the next day everything's changed. So
Exactly. So we'll definitely be talking about what's going on there here during the show. Also, hey, big space news this week, the landing of Perseverance. So Perseverance landing on Mars, our latest SUV-sized RC car that JPL and NASA have deployed to Mars. We'll be talking about that a little bit. And then there's, on the list over here, it says something about SLS and Artemis. So, yeah, apparently that's going to be on the topic list as well. But everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Like I said, this is our live show. We do coverage over the course of the week where it's like, here's a launch, saw Antares go earlier, or here's what's going on with Starship. But every Saturday, we do this NASA Spaceflight live show where we talk about all sorts of different space news. And because we're live, we also want to be interactive. So if you have a question for us, tag us in chat at NASA Spaceflight. Got some nifty software. Your questions will be pulled into a queue as long as you tag us, and we'll bring them up as they're relevant. So if we're talking about, Perseverance and you ask a Starship question, we're probably not going to talk about the Starship questions during Perseverance, vice versa. Just be patient. There's no way we can get to every single question, but we do try. Also, if you do super chats, we're able to continue coverage like this because of your support. So if you've done that, please be patient. We do try to read those out on occasion, especially if you've got a question, and there's already a scroll bar on the super chat queue. Good grief. We appreciate you. We will get to those. Thank you for your patience there as well. But without further ado, Chris and Eric, let's get going. I think we're starting today with the big news from Mars. So let's talk Perseverance, shall we?
Yeah, that was crazy because I remember we were watching the Curiosity and even the other Mars landers. Every single time they achieve this, you think how? Because you watch the preview videos, especially with the sky crane and all the propulsive landing, everything to do with that 7 minutes of terror. It seems so surreal on a video. Never mind doing it in real life. And then we got those photographs yesterday, didn't we? Of Sky Crane, the actual maneuver dropping the rover onto the surface of Mars, and also a picture from MRO, which showed the parachuted assisted landing towards the landing site, literally angled towards where it was going to land at its target destination.
Chris,
and you're thinking, how on earth did they do this?
You're pulling a JPL press conference here where I'm not quite ready with the images, but there's the Sky Crane image that we've got up on the screen there. And
that's amazing because it's not just dropping. Well, I say dropping. It's not just lowering the rover onto the surface. Look at the lines.
Yeah.
That wiggly line there is a communication line that's literally passing on that communication of how the rover's doing, and all that has survived a transit to Mars and then worked perfectly on time 6 months later, or whatever it is. It's surreal to me that if they can get more photographs like that, I don't know if that's just the only one they've got or it's the first one they've got, but even the avoidance maneuver later from Sky Crane itself, if they can find some anything, a footage of that, again, is an amazing thing. It's landing a 1-ton rover on the surface of Mars. What are your thoughts, Eric? Never mind me, because I'll talk for 10 minutes.
First of all, I would say that the production values from when they faked the moon landings in the 1960s have come a long way 50 years later. So we got colored pictures from Mars. No, I mean, it's incredible. And on Monday, I'm pretty confident that they're going to release video. So this is a still image from a sequence of video that was shot on the way down. So I don't know if we're going to get the full 7.5 minutes of terror, but we're going to get a significant chunk of that sort of showing much more, scenes like that of the actual rover coming down from the descent, perspective of seeing what actually happened. And so, I mean, we've never seen video like that before, and it'll be incredible. And the fact that MRO is still kicking in Mars orbit after about 15 years and delivering these incredible pictures, of the rover itself descending the surface of Mars. That's an incredible machine as well. I mean, and its high-rise camera has given us such spectacular views of Mars. Yeah, there it is.
What I find amazing is that so many other countries haven't achieved this, and now we've got
no one has.
Where there's other countries involved. It's amazing, really, the progress they're making now. But it's being trailblazed by the United States. It's something that JPL and NASA can take a lot of pride in. Because I don't think a lot of people appreciate how hard it is until they realize that all these other space powers have struggled so badly with it. And that's the photograph there we're looking on screen right now, which is showing literally under parachute. And this is Mars. I think when people say this is Mars, they don't really appreciate what that means.
If we were to see a Soyuz capsule landing like that on Earth and someone from the space station took that picture, we'd be impressed.
Yes.
Well, this is across the solar system, and we have a spacecraft in orbit around Mars and another small one landing on Mars, and it's taking a picture of it. I mean, it is phenomenal. It's absolutely phenomenal.
That's exactly what I was just thinking, because we have seen those parachute-assisted landings of Soyuz, and they've been impressive just from the ground. It's thinking this huge chute, and they've got a capsule underneath it. And again, the rarefied atmosphere of Mars, it's a lot harder as well. So it's not the same as parachute assisting on Earth. It's another ball game completely. And then for it to drop its chute, and then to drop the rover, and then to do a sky crane propulsive maneuver where they're bringing it down on literally on rocket boosters that have again had to fire 6 months after launch, which is something I always worry about. Will these things fire after being traveling through the coldest of space? And they always do. So that's props to Aerojet Rocketdyne. I think it would be responsible for those thrusters. Yeah. And then to just lower it to the point where it doesn't get covered in dust, which would ruin it. Then lower it and then separate the sky crane and crash that away some distance away from the actual rover itself. And then to get the first picture from Hascam, I think it was, where they just showed it basically on the surface of Mars minutes later. Happy as anything.
It's really interesting. It is such a complex sequence of events that have to happen for the landing to be safe. And this is we are now pushing kind of the limits of what you can do with non-propulsive landing with the sky crane and so forth. And so to get heavier stuff down to the surface of Mars, you really need to do propulsive landing, which I think why NASA was somewhat excited about the concept of Red Dragon, which was to send a non-crewed Dragon to Mars. They obviously moved away from that, but to get much bigger than this, you really are going to have to get a propulsive landing. And so it's what SpaceX is trying to do with Starship in terms of landing on Earth has lots of applicability, not just for them and their project, but also for NASA and sort of future larger missions there.
I wish I'd thought about this before we started the show. I'd got a picture lined up, but do you remember a design reference mission presentation, which was public from NASA, which showed these huge propulsive landers in the Constellation program for Mars? They were like out of sci-fi movies. They were huge sky crane like looking, but with actual habitats and rovers and all of the materials needed for Mars. I'm going to find that later because that's just literally brought it back to me. These huge propulsive landers, which were going to be launched on Ares 5. And obviously that never happened, but it was what they were thinking for Mars already 10, 12 years ago was propulsive landers. How long ago was Constellation now? It was long enough, wasn't it?
Constellation ran from 2005 to 2010.
Yeah. So it was a lot, yeah. And that's what they were thinking back then. They were thinking for Mars landings, they were thinking needed propulsive landing for these large habitats. And of course, with SpaceX and Starship, which we'll come on to later, without going to cigarettes, so segue too much, they are obviously propulsive landings. It's all come back to that. And that's all. I mentioned something about the benefits of these successes for Mars landings, where these EDL data, the entry, descent, and landing data, and even the ground surface data, the radiation, the conditions, the environments, are all going to play in towards these future Mars bases. So it's not just looking at rocks.
There's some incredible technology on Perseverance. The MOXIE is going to study trying to pull methane from the atmosphere or oxygen from the atmosphere. The helicopter, obviously, the much better lasers to do some spectroscopy of ancient sediments. I mean, people. I think sort of some people have maybe like, well, we sent a similar rover there 8 years ago or 9 years ago with Curiosity. What's the big deal? But Perseverance is going to do some new and incredibly exciting science and sort of blaze a trail for future missions, both robotic and human. Yeah.
This what we're showing right on screen now. That was tense as it was just watching the computer simulation of what they were getting. That was tense enough. Never mind live cameras on some like future mission where they got live broadcasts of what they're seeing in real time. There's 7 minutes of terror.
I mean, think about the dedication that these people have. I mean, I interviewed one guy who spent 12 years of his life working on the terrain relative navigation system.
Wow.
And this was active for about 20 seconds during the descent, on the order of 20 seconds. And his whole life or much of his professional career had been devoted to it, but that allowed them to land near this delta in this relatively hazardous area. And that was one big advantage that this mission had over Curiosity. Curiosity, they sort of picked a pretty benign place to land because they could only, they could get within dozens of kilometers of the site. Here they wanted to be within about 4 kilometers of where they landed, so they needed this sophisticated navigation system.
Yeah.
But spend your whole career for 4 to 5 or 10 seconds of a mission lifetime. It's pretty good dedication.
And realistically, like, to jump in real quick, I put the image of the landing area up on the screen. And when we talk about terrain relative navigation, that is the sensors on the spacecraft looking down at basically this and trying to figure out where to land. So we know, all right, it's going to get kind of close to this area, but what you're talking about there, that's like actively the spacecraft deciding that looks like a good spot, like pull it into a parking space.
It's so what it's doing is first of all, it's taking a series of lower resolution pictures to establish where it is. And then tries to map those against existing satellite imagery of the surface of Mars. And then as it gets further, it's taking higher resolution image to look for boulders and things like that to make sure that the area that it's going to land in is clear. And it's a remarkable technology. And it's absolutely needed if you're going to land in these more areas that are a little more hazardous. Like, they're going to need something very similar when they ultimately do a lander to Europa, Jupiter's moon, because that surface is very chaotic in terms of the terrain.
Absolutely. So
the fun thing for me is I'm more into rockets. I always have been. And the actual, beyond Earth orbit exploration missions like this were always fascinating, but not something that had my piqued interest. But the Curiosity and Perseverance landings, all these achievements, especially since the first time I saw that first video for 7 Minutes of Terror, it's engaging. And it's something where I think Austin Barnard tweeted that someone started a hashtag saying, why bother with Mars or something like that, as some kind of like anti-reaction to the achievements of what's happened. And, if you're not inspired by this kind of thing and you think that limited amount of money could be better spent elsewhere, which is minute in the big game of, in the game of things, then, I can't agree with it. It's something that, especially in this era where we're going through so much rubbish in the planet, that it's a positive and it's worth every cent. And what it'll bring back in the long run would be a profit in the long run because of the way it's advancing technology.
Yeah, and I agree completely. I mean, if humanity needs uplifting things, inspiring things. Like, our existence ought to be more than just getting by, right? We ought to be doing great things. And I think you see with a human landing on the moon or setting a 1-ton rover on Mars, what humans can aspire to when we work together. And that was the point that the NASA people were making. I mean, there's lots of European technology on the descent stage and on the lander that's on Mars now with Perseverance, and that was because of collaboration between the United States and Europe on the mission.
Yeah. This wasn't just an advertising campaign for donuts?
I don't think so.
Oh dear, was that a question or was that you?
No, that was not a question. I wanted to hop back to this really quickly because Chris, you said rockets, and it brought something to my attention. The exhaust plumes hitting the ground here in this image. I don't know that a lot of people have realized what this image shows, not just the rover, but down on the ground. You want to talk about that for just a second and how that may map to landing other things on Mars? Starship.
There's a few things here. Obviously, if they'd landed it propulsively without this sky crane maneuver, you risk covering the instrumentation with dust. It's just not a good idea, and that's why they've come up with this idea. And it obviously works because they've got the data from the previous, with Curiosity. So they do know it's a viable way of doing it to mitigate the issue of the thrusters kicking up dust and covering the rover and covering the instrumentation, which is the worst thing. It will get dust coverings after a while, but it's just, you don't want to start life with that situation. But I keep thinking back to something I mentioned before, where, forgive me, is it Marston Space, where they're thinking of landing on the moon and using a kind of like mixture into the propellant on the landing burn to cover the surface in an ablative kind of covering, which would then paint a landing pad on the surface of the moon. And that would be another way around it. I don't know if you heard much about that, Eric.
I haven't looked into Marston Space too much. That does sound something innovative they would do. That's one reason why the moon is kind of a good test ground for Mars, especially for some of these big spacecraft systems, because while the dust profiles are different and the regolith is different, it still is a very sort of dusty environment on the moon. And so if you can figure out ways to mitigate it there, then you can apply that, lessons learned to Mars. And obviously it's much cheaper, relatively speaking, to send stuff to the surface of the moon than Mars. But the dust is a huge issue. I mean, it's going to be a huge issue on the moon. It was a big issue for Apollo, and it'll be a big issue on Mars. I mean, it's just, these are dirty, dusty places where there's not enough moisture to hold things in check.
Yeah, on the screen right here, this is something that is a rare thing for us to see. Let me see if I can break out the drawing pen real quick. But you can actually see some of the lines flowing here, right?
Yeah.
And so that is, the sky crane is up above the camera, like the camera's mounted on the sky crane, and the engines are pointing down, but you can almost see, this is sort of where the engine exhaust is hitting, and it's sort of radiating out, and you see it over on this side as well, and you see it down here, and that blowing dust, like you were talking about, Chris, with covering up the instruments. I know, it looks like, why did you draw a sun on Mars? But looking at this image, that's something that they have to think about, and they've thought about it with the sky crane. Go ahead.
Yeah, Adam Stelzner, the chief engineer of the Mars Perseverance mission, talked about that yesterday during the briefing that they had, sort of the striations in the sand you mentioned. And he said that in this image, it looks like the rover's about 7 meters off the surface. So it's obviously the dust isn't getting on there, but it's a huge concern. And you hope for dust devils from time to time, or to blow the instruments off, or to clean off the solar panels and things like that.
Absolutely. So let me do this real quick, y'all. We are going to hop back in because there's tons of questions coming in. There's tons of super chats and stuff like that. Let me say thank you to some people real quick. Thomas Anfang, thank you so much. It says, hi, Eric. Congrats on the book. Looking forward to reading it. Like I do all your reporting.
Later.
Yeah, there you go. So this is a question for you, Eric. And it says, how do you think the new administration might change Artemis? We're going to be talking about Artemis coming up next. Do we want to hold that conversation for that?
Yes.
All right. We'll talk more in depth about that. I saw the question there, Thomas. Thank you so much for the support, and we'll get into that coming up next. Luke, thank you so much. It says, hi, NSF team. Listening from Boca Chica Beach. Thanks for everything you do. So somebody actually out there at Boca Chica watching the show right now. Rough Rider Show says, Eric, really appreciate all your great reporting. People have lots of questions for you, so if there's something we can't answer, feel free to say. But learn anything new on the SN9 FAA recap? That sounds like Starship-related stuff, huh? We'll talk about Starship later, too, right?
Yes.
We'll hold on to those. Let's see here. CAMP Railroad says, jumping in to say hi to the NSF crew. We appreciate you. And I'm going to start reading these questions before I read the rest of the statement real quick. There's some more Starship stuff. Again, folks, the questions that are coming in.
Surprising.
Yeah, I know, right? Surprise, surprise. We are going to end the show with Starship. We spent a lot of time talking about Starship, and we will definitely get to all these Starship. In fact, everything is Starship related right now. Yeah. We put a rover on Mars, people. Come on. Yeah, here we go. Tony says, great stuff. Your coverage on space topic is second to none. Thank you so much, Tony. Thank you for that. And y'all, across the board, I see all the questions there in chat. Let me grab one for Perseverance. So here's a good one. Let's end the Perseverance discussion with this. And we're sort of spoiled by NASA because they send these things to Mars and they're like, yeah, it's supposed to work for 8 weeks. And then 10 years later, it's still kicking or whatever. What are our thoughts on Perseverance? Do we think that it may go the same? Like, are they just hedging there? Why don't they say it can last for 5 years or whatever? What are y'all's thoughts on that?
They have a minimum design lifetime that they have to meet. And so that when they say the rover is basically guaranteed to work for 2 years. And then after that, they expect it to work longer, right? They have many multiples of redundancies on a lot of these systems. And since Curiosity is still going, 9 years, almost 9 years after it put down the planet, I think it's reasonable to expect that Perseverance, will go for at least a decade or so. But you never know. You might get bad luck. It may get stuck. It could get stuck in a bad dust storm and get covered up. But basically, NASA guarantees to the taxpayers when it builds these things essentially that they're building to a certain requirement minimum, and then they have an expectation to go forward beyond that.
Gotcha. And okay, I saw this scroll through, and I gotta toss this in with Perseverance. We all sort of saw the excitement of the JPL personnel. There were a lot of tweets out on Twitter saying, "Wow, y'all can't wait until you see these questions or the images," but then they sort of held on to them to the press conference, and then they released the image. And the last time I refreshed the raw image site, I still haven't seen anything. So what are y'all's thoughts on JPL sort of holding these images instead of just releasing the fire hose and say, look at all this fantastic stuff, and doing a little bit more produced release of the images? I mean, I know we're all really excited, but we want to see some images.
So NASA is pretty careful about its image, not the images in that sense, but sort of how it portrays itself. I think we'll see that site, that raw image site, populate more. But clearly NASA is getting a lot more data down than they're putting on that raw image site, because I saw an unfiltered version of that lander image the night before it was released. So they're getting all this data down. They're not putting any of it out there. Now, I will say that in terms of what the other lander at China, or the other lander at Mars right now, the Chinese lander, NASA is much more open about what they share and their timelines and all of that. So I give them a bit of slack. They're pretty good about communicating what they find. And I would also say, just sort of bringing up the Tianwen-1 mission, that what China is trying to do with that spacecraft in bundling, an orbiter, a lander, and a rover all in one on their first try at the red planet is enormously challenging. And I think the landing for that has been pushed to June, because they're going to survey the landing site where they hope to set down. But if they pull that off on their first try, that will be an enormous achievement by the Chinese space program. That even for me, that would be more impressive than landing on the far side of the moon, or what they've done with their program on the moon. It's just super hard. The Soviet Union tried about half a dozen times to put something down on the surface of Mars, and the longest thing anything survived was 20 seconds. NASA obviously has an extraordinary record, but if China goes there and achieves this on their first try, that would be a really bold statement of their future potential.
What do you think, Chris? Have you?
I agree. Yeah. I've got nothing to add.
You're just exactly concur.
Yeah. I mean, the thing with Chinese is that there's been a lot of panic, especially the occasional, I don't have much interest in politics, but the occasional Senate hearing I've had, you got some senator who's going to go, China, big, massive threat to the United States, NASA, we've got to do more. But they've not really done all that much, really. They do a lot of launches, a lot of communication satellites, a lot of spy satellites. They had the space station modules. They've only just recently got rendezvous sorted out. They're a long way behind of what America can do, but they can do it quite cheaply. So they're catching up in that sense, where if this Mars mission works, which would be a massive ask for them, then they've really taken a step forward, and that will inspire them to go further on with their other projects. Who's going to wish them badly? No one, So I hope it does work out for them, because it's just the more the merrier, as the saying goes.
All right. Well, I think we have covered a lot of different stuff. Of course, there's so many things going on with Perseverance. They're still going through those checkouts and stuff like that. And we're all asking about the helicopter. I see tons of good questions in chat over here. But we do have some other topics, and we want to leave a lot of time for Starship in the history of SpaceX and some of the things that you're really tuned into there, Eric. So let's move on to the next topic that we have on our list here today. And this is going to be fun. Let's have a look at what is going on with everybody's favorite orange rocket, Artemis, SLS, testing, green runs, etc., etc., etc. He's got the orange rocket good shirt on.
Especially because Eric's on.
That was just for me, wasn't it?
Yeah. It sold at least 5 T-shirts in our store, by the way.
I never checked to see if we sold any of those flip-flops after the Percy thing.
It's flip-flops and then Orange Rocket Good are the 2 worst sellers.
The 2 worst sellers.
I'm not even joking. And I've got 2.
Oh, so SLS, Artemis, hot fire. What's going on with that, Chris? Kick it off for us.
They're going to try again, aren't they? They're going to do a second static fire test and hopefully get to full duration. If they don't get to full duration, they're going to have to do it a third time. They want that full duration now. I think after the first aborted test, they were intimating that they're possibly saying they've got enough data, but that really should never have been the case, because they're going to the TVC checks. They have to do gimbal checks on the nozzles. They got nowhere close to that. So it's something they want to complete. But they're up against the clock, because they're already stacking the boosters in the high bay, in the VAB. I said high bay. Boca Chica's
in the high bay.
Oh, dearie me. Yeah, they're already stacking the boosters in the VAB at KSC, and they're staggering the booster stacking to 1 segment a week on purpose to try and keep within the timeline that allows for them to not run out of time before launch. I think launch is now, all the KSC guys tell me, February at the best next year, rather than end this year, as much as they caveat by saying, but we'll try everything possible to get done this year. I think just everything we're watching now in the timeline, with this core stage not being at the Kennedy Space Center yet, points to this never going to be 2021 launch. It wasn't for a while, really, realistically, but now it's kind of like proven out with the timeline they've got with this second static fire test requirement. So, and the other thing is as well, is they've learned a lot from the service. Well, safe in the core stage after a firing takes a lot longer than they probably thought it did. So once they get this static fire test done at the end of this month, they've got about another month before they start moving it onto the barge for the trip to KSC. So that again adds a bit more time to the whole cycle of schedule, the processing flow towards launch. I mean, I'm going to ask Eric if he thinks launch is going to happen in 2021, but I know the answer already. But I'll ask him anyway.
I think I reported 2 years ago it was going to slip to 2021. Yeah. So I'm good on that. On it happening next year, probably. I mean, we'll see if it gets delayed further. But one question for me is what is a successful test? And that's what I asked this week, because when I interviewed Steve Jerzik, I think on Tuesday of this past week, I said, Steve, what's how long does it need to fire to give you the confidence that it's going to, that's good to go for launch? And he said 350 seconds plus or minus. Yeah. And that's 6 minutes.
That's through the TVC checks as well. That's the important thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And then so I asked during the teleconference yesterday morning with Julie Bassler and John Honeycutt and Tom Whitmire from NASA and John Shannon from Boeing, what's a successful test? And they were saying 4 minutes. Then that would achieve their 10 objectives that they had for this and give them the confidence that they needed that it was safe for launch. So I think if it fires for 4 minutes, then we're looking at the 25th, the next week, for the test. And I think it's 2200 UTC is the the targeted time, but John Shannon from Boeing said it could happen earlier than that, an hour earlier than that. So if it does not fire for 4 minutes, they seem now to be saying that they probably would, as you said, Chris, fire it a third time. It will be interesting to me if they get really close to 4 minutes to see what they did. I was surprised by the messaging after the first test when they said, well, we're going to go back and look at it and do a risk analysis and, yada, yada, yada. When some engineers were telling me that, like, there's no way they're not going to fire this thing again, because you didn't get the data you needed. Like, you did not prove it was safe to launch. So anyway, it's interesting. And we'll see. I mean, it was. I was there the first time they fired it up, and it felt damned impressive. You could feel it. You could feel it in your chest because you're only about a mile away from where the firing takes place.
And you talk about speaking to NASA, the acting administrator. In your article, he referenced the other thing about the timeline, which we've all pretty much all assumed already, that 2024 for the moon landing was not really realistic at all. And now we've got it on quote, rather than us obviously estimating it and working out for ourselves from resources. You've now got the quote saying it's not going to be 2024. Right.
So if you talk to Bridenstine off the record, he would admit that, right? That 2024 wasn't happening. But publicly, officials were sort of still holding that time frame. But clearly, the landing system, at least, and potentially the rocket, would not be ready for 2024, a human landing. And another big issue is the spacesuits. I'm told that that is a very high pole in the tent, and they're pretty far away from sort of having those ready to go for lunar, excursions. So there's lots of things to get done, and the Biden administration is not wedded to the 2024 timeframe, which was both a political date but also sort of something to push the workforce forward. I haven't heard the new date. I think it'll be 2026 or 2028. It's going to depend upon funding for the lander. And we'll get some kind of inkling, because Steve Jurczyk, the acting NASA administrator, said that they're looking to, by mid or late April, to down select from, so there's the national team led by Blue Origin, Dynetics, and SpaceX. They're probably going to down select the two teams sometime in April, and that will help sort of inform the timeline. But ultimately, we really may not know the plan until the president's budget comes out a year from now. So
right.
It could be a while.
The thing I don't want to get into our next topic already, but the thing that always people bring up, and I agree is a valid question, is if they go for 2026 or 2028, what's the potential SpaceX might privately do it anyway before then?
So I think if SpaceX is a customer of NASA, they're not going to try to leap out ahead of because let's say if they get a human landing system contract, second phase, that's worth billions of dollars.
Yeah.
Okay. These are not going to be $100 million contracts. These are going to be huge contracts, and potential for a long-term deal, because if you're doing a moon lander for NASA, then Starship could be a Mars lander for NASA, right? So that's an extremely important relationship. So just like with Dragon, I mean, SpaceX could have made the case that, well, we think Falcon 9 is ready. We think Crew Dragon is ready. We're going to fly Elon and three of his friends up to orbit, and they're not going to go to space station. And so we're going to get a FAA launch license and just go. They didn't do that because NASA paid for a lot of development of Crew Dragon, and because they were going to fly a lot of missions for them. So they weren't going to get. So I do not see if Starship is selected, I don't see SpaceX jumping out ahead of that. If Starship isn't selected, then it's game on. Like they're gonna, just like they built the Falcon Heavy and built Starship to sort of show up NASA's rocket building capabilities. It would be the same kind of thing. I would think that that's what they would do.
Yeah.
Do you think is there some risk for SpaceX there? You said something that fired a neuron that I had never really connected before. But if SpaceX beats NASA to Mars, is there a possibility that NASA would be like, okay, yeah, you don't need any more funding to do this anymore. Congratulations, you went to Mars. Is there any risk for SpaceX there? You were talking about them being a customer. Maybe they need to let the customer go first, or that all comes down.
First of all, in my mind, I don't see SpaceX going to Mars without NASA. I think it's a joint mission. There's a whole lot of things that have to happen beyond just the transportation system.
Right.
You are not going to get an argument from me that if Starship works, it is clearly the best transportation system for Mars that exists now or could exist in the next 20 or 30 years. It checks all the boxes of cost, reusability, size, volume, capability, blah, 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 blah. Better than anything out there, or better than anything coming. But transportation is just one piece of the puzzle. You've got to have somewhere to live on the surface of Mars. You've got to have power systems. You've got to have food. All of these things, these closed loop systems that NASA has spent 20 years studying on the International Space Station, they have the expertise for that. There's just all sorts of regulatory issues, planetary protection. I mean, there are lots of things that SpaceX boxes are going to have to check that would be a hell of a lot easier if NASA was there helping them check them.
That makes a lot of sense.
It's not just the funding. It's all of the things about living in space, living on Mars, and just it's still difficult for me to see just SpaceX rocking up one day and launching a dozen people to the surface of Mars.
Yeah. And that even sort of matches with things that Elon has said in the past, like he's building the railway or whatever. And, the base, once you get there, that may be somebody else. We're going to have to rely on these other partners to build out these other systems. That sort of maps with his comments, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. A lot of people in our forum and on Twitter and in social media occasionally say, why don't they just cancel SLS now? How complicated would that be to cancel SLS this year, let's say, politically and funding? Because a lot of the assumptions is that NASA's SLS funding would just get rediverted into SpaceX, which I just don't think is even politically possible. But what would happen if SLS was cancelled this year? Could it happen? What would happen?
It could happen. So here's the deal with SLS. The White House administrations, the Obama administration, the Trump administration, and even the Biden administration, if they could push a button and just cancel SLS, I think they would.
Wow.
Because it's if you throw ground systems in there, it's more than $3 billion a year, and it's just not delivering. And it's clear there are architectures out there that are much lower cost to do similar things in terms of launch. However, Congress created the rocket and still supports it by and large. And so if you were to cancel SLS is you would lose a lot of support in Congress for your broader exploration program. If you were to cancel SLS, what happens to political support for Artemis? Because all of a sudden Boeing says, well, this is a dumb plan, right? I mean, why are we going back to the moon? We should be going to Mars or whatever, or NASA should be out of, whatever. They're not going to be supportive in terms of lobbying anymore. And it's just, there's too many jobs tied to the program across the country in all these congressional districts, whereby if you were to cancel SLS, you would lose the support you now have, the tenuous support you now have for Artemis in Congress. So that's one reason why I don't think it will happen. The way SLS gets canceled in my mind is if it just continues to not perform. Like if there's a serious problem during the green run test, or if they drop one of the boosters during the stacking process, or if something happens in the West dress rehearsal. I mean, these what they're trying to do in terms of assembling this big rocket is not easy. I mean, it's challenging, and problems could happen. And I remember talking to Chris Kraft, who was the original flight director at NASA. He lived a couple miles from me here in Houston, and so I would go over and visit with him a couple of times. 3-4 times a year, and just sit up and talk. He'd tell stories, and he would always, he would just say that, like, look, they're going to have huge problems when they try to integrate the rocket. And the core stage is the first time they've really integrated anything on SLS. And so, people are saying, well, all they've got to do is finish the core stage hot fire test, get it to Kennedy, stack the boosters, put the boosters on there, and then put Orion on there. But that's all hard, and they probably will run into problems. And if there are serious problems, that will sort of, I think, raise the temperature on potentially doing away with SLS. But right now, it's the political support for it is just too strong in Congress.
Yeah. There we go. Do you have any questions, Daz?
Sure. Yeah, I can grab some questions real quick. A lot of somebody asked where did the shuttles or where do the engines for SLS come from? Specifically, I think trolling you.
Yeah, well, The funny thing is, they're literally using the retired Space Shuttle RS-25 fleet of engines, and they've got a couple of development engines which they've recycled in, but then afterwards they'll be using the RS-25E. Now, first of all, Wade Hale doesn't like me calling it the RS-25.
Well, he doesn't, does he? He wants them called Space Shuttle main engines.
Yeah.
I love Wayne.
And the second thing is Aerojet Rocketdyne don't like me saying RS-25E. They just want it called RS-25. But the new ones they're building are expendable in mind, as they say, rather than the reusable by design RS-25Ds, which they're being taken from the Space Shuttle fleet. But yeah, they're all former Space Shuttle engines.
And so along those lines, at some point, isn't NASA going to run out of the old Space Shuttle engines for SLS? What happens then?
Yeah. Well,
don't worry. Don't worry. Aerojet got $1 billion contract just to restart production of the RS-25 engine, and they got another big contract worth more than $1 billion to start building them. So they're coming. They will come whether the rocket flies 4 times or not.
The beautiful thing about that is, and I say beautiful ironically, is that they also got a large contract during the TNR, which is transition and retirement of the Space Shuttle fleet, to cut down the production lines, which are now passing. So they're just basically cashing on everything there. I wonder if they kept everything in storage and just brought it back out and said, yo, it's brand new. It's all brand new, this equipment.
I'm going to jump in on this real quick, and wouldn't it be, I don't know, poetic is the right word, but they spool up production, they get $1 billion, $2 billion, whatever, to build more RS-25s, and then the program gets canceled, and so we have more RS-25s to put in museums, and we thought we weren't going to have any.
Yeah. That's the thing. Everyone says it belongs in a museum. I don't know. I kind of like the idea of them going out in one blaze of glory, but I think we've been so spoilt now by SpaceX that the whole point of expendability is just out of the window, isn't it? No one likes it, and rightly so.
It's a remarkable paradigm shift in just a matter of a few years. And this last year for me was really a transition point when you had the NRO flying on the 5th flight of a Falcon 9. It's crazy. Sirius flew on the 7th flight of a Falcon 9, and this year we're going to see likely crew missions on the 2nd flight of a Falcon 9. I mean, it clearly crossed the Rubicon last year in terms of the acceptability of the most important missions, putting them on flight proven or used rockets. Incredible.
That's a key word as well. Flight proven. It's not rather than like secondhand or reused or anything like it's flight proven. So they're selling it as kind of like, this rocket's proved itself better than a maiden flight.
I mean, I when I first heard that term, I laughed. I said, "Well, that's a clever bit of marketing."
Yeah.
And they kind of got mocked for it. Elon got mocked for it, but it's true. I mean, I asked Gwen Shotwell about that. I said, I used to laugh about flight proven, and she's like, "Yeah, everyone laughed at us, and so we just went out and did it." And
that sounds
like a selling point.
That sounds like a perfect segue, does.
A perfect segue to what, Chris? What would you like to talk about next? Let me do this. And again, y'all, I see all the super chats and stuff coming through. We're pulling out questions that are relevant to what we're talking about. We can't always get every single question because, remember, it takes you about 20 seconds to type out a question, and then we sit here and we talk about it for 5 minutes. So given a limited amount of time in the show, there's no way we can get through them all. We appreciate people putting them into chat. That brings us with just under half the show left to move on and talk about everybody's favorite shiny rocket, Starship. So I'm just going to be rolling some video and stuff in the background. If y'all see something in the video you want to talk about, if you talk about something specifically, I can bring up stuff. But as we do with the Starships, we're going to be featuring some of the fantastic daily videos that we get from Mary, Boca Chica gal out there. And I'll just be rolling those on the side over here. But take it away, when hop, I guess is the question on everybody's mind.
It is, isn't it? That is now the big question, because the weather situation in Texas has been so dire. That has been the responsibility, been a responsible factor for delaying what was going to be an SN10 static fire and then launch last week. Should we say last week? Yeah, last week. It's now ready to go again into what we call road closures and preparations. The road closure for Monday is now set. So we know that a static fire test could take place on Monday, pending Mary getting a letter through a letterbox on Sunday night, saying as a static fire test tomorrow, T-minus 10 minute siren from Boca Chica Sheriff will sound, and then that's when you get the clue. That's when you know where you are on the timeline. The second thing to watch out for is if the static fire is successful, get the right data from the quick look review, then Mary will get told there's an evacuation notice either the following day or the day after, and that will be launch day. So while SpaceX is very, very quiet about what Starship's doing and the schedule and things like that, apart from the now, obviously the Elon tweets, which give us some clues of what's happening, that's a reliable factor. We know that when Mary gets these notices, we know what's going to happen the next day, pending the acceptable conditions and pending no issues with the rocket. But we're talking about SN10. SN10 may launch next week, early next week. They then got SN11 down the road in high bay. So if SN10 has a problem with landing or the flip maneuver, or even earlier, let's face it, SN8 and 9, they had amazing flights, but they could have gone wrong off the pad. They could have blown up on the pad. They could have blown up during ascent. They could have nosedived towards Mexico. They got a lot of things proven out in these attempts, where it's only the final element with the Raptors and the flip on the SN10 at least, where they lost the vehicle. And they lost the vehicle over the pad as well, the landing pad. So these were massive achievements in their own rights with these two vehicles. If they can stick the landing with SN10, then wow, that'd be amazing. If not, SN11 is now fully stacked. It's got its nose cone, it's got its aero surfaces. It'd be ready to roll within a matter of days. So that will be the next vehicle to take up the mantle. Eric was talking earlier about after the problem with SLS during the green run, or a booster falls over in the VAB, and that would be a critical situation for its timeline and its future. If SpaceX loses SN10 on landing, the next vehicle is down the road. It's down Highway 4. It's waiting to go. So they can do it again. Just like with SN9. When SN9 failed, they literally had SN10 on the next mountain next door to it, ready to go. It was only weather that delayed it. So it's an amazing cadence of vehicles we're seeing in Boca Chica right now. And with all Mary videos, there's always some like third eye things where there's extra things. First of all, these are more sections of even more future vehicles. They've got SN15, which is coming after SN11 in the mid bay being stacked. So that's another vehicle that's coming along. But they've got all these boost sections outside. A lot of these are for heavy, and a lot of these are future Starships. It just again proves out the cadence of what we're seeing here. We're seeing literally a factory in South Texas spewing out all these sections of stainless steel and ready to be made into rockets. And if they start having successes with the landing, they have achieved everything they need to do with these 12.5 to 15 kilometer, maybe 10 kilometer. It's between that range. They'll have completed that task and they'll then go even higher. When they will go orbital is the big question. I think even with the failures I had with SN8 and SN9, I think this year is very much a practical target for them to go orbital with Starship. It's ambitious. I might be, get a bit...
Uh-oh. We might have actually lost him.
Away there, but I'm going to just stop talking now and just actually ask Eric what he thinks of the future.
Right. So the first thing is that there's a couple other issues with SN10 flying. I thought I just would want to touch on. First of all is I think they were waiting for some pad concrete to cure this week too, which may have been an issue in addition to the weather. And also the FAA came out on Friday and said they had completed their investigation of the SN9 mishap. And so they were waiting for that as well. Now they've still got to go out and get a license or to launch or a permit to launch SN10, but that will be much easier now that they've closed out the SN9 crash. So I agree with you. A launch this next year is quite possible. This coming week is quite possible for SN10. What they've done there in terms of building the factory beneath tents is absolutely remarkable. We're on SN10, so they built basically 10 of these prototypes. Well, there've been some tanks and stuff in there, but 10 vehicles basically in a year, which is incredible. It's the value of being hardware rich, right? If you have a problem, you can move on to the next prototype, and you can do that if you meet two conditions. One, if you have the resources to do it, and now clearly they do. SpaceX does to invest in all of this stainless steel and the Raptor engines and so forth. And you have to be willing to fail, right? You have to be willing to blow stuff up in a very public manner. And NASA is not, and that's because they've had some very high profile failures in the past, and Congress gets very upset when they see, explosions or things like that. There's not that much of a, they don't distinguish between a test program and a flight program. And a lot of other aerospace companies are that way as well. Like they either don't show their failures, or they work very hard in sort of a linear design method to avoid failures. And SpaceX is very Elon. This comes directly from Elon. Basically says, we will accept a certain level of failure as long as we learn from that failure and apply that to the next. So if you make a mistake, it's okay. If you repeat a mistake, there's hell to pay. Basically.
Yeah. Another thing, by the way, while watching this video right now, we can actually see the orbital site building up. That is an impressive amount of work going on there. We saw the mount for Super Heavy, which was built basically like the tubes, which they're going to be then place the mount on top of. But now we're seeing a lot of work around that mount, which is involving even shielding for the GSE. There's a lot of building construction going on there. And we do now know that there's people being employed. Padre knows one person in particular, Gene, I should say, who is going to be brought down there for a years-long contract to build a 450-foot tall tower, I think it was. And that'll be the FSS. That'll be the structure that they're going to literally use as a crane as well to stack starships on Super Heavies and on that mount. And that is surreal to me because, I mean, it was impressive enough to see Starship with the nose cone on the first time. Then it started to look like a real rocket. We've seen the flying water towers. We've had all those jokes about water silos and things like that. But to see a nose cone and aero surface on a Starship and then see it fly, I think that brought it home to a lot of people that things are getting real now. But then if they see a Super Heavy launch, that is going to be something else. That'll be a Saturn V moment to a lot of people who, like me, have been brought up on shuttle. That to me is surreal. But what do you think, Eric, as far as timeline towards getting both orbital and then the Super Heavy launches, if you've got any inclinations?
Yeah, so I think you're right that seeing a Super Heavy launch with the Starship will be sort of a real defining moment for them. I think the Falcon Heavy was that moment for SpaceX, and I think launching a Starship, orbital Starship on top of the Super Heavy will be that moment. I think they have a reasonable shot to do it this year. It's going to come down to not just the hardware, though. I think you're going to have to satisfy the FAA that it's safe to launch from Boca Chica, and you're not all that far from South Padre Island. And it's so, I honestly don't know if they need the updated environmental impact statement before they would do an orbital test attempt. I think they probably do, but I don't know that for sure. And so there's a lot of paperwork issues to get through as well to show that they can safely launch this stack and it's not going to cause damage in South Padre and other locations nearby, because this is such a massive, orbital vehicle that they're putting here. But I think the pace that they're moving, they could certainly make that attempt this year, if not this year, early next year. And so once you get Starship to orbit, and if they start doing flights and eventually they make it so it lands, I think that again is sort of, it becomes much more difficult to sit back and say, well, we need the Space Launch System because we can't count on these guys to build this ambitious vehicle. I mean, I think that argument is ridiculous anyway, because can anyone argue that now that SpaceX is the best company in the world at designing and building rockets? I mean, they've done 3 basically in a little more than a decade with the Falcon 1, Falcon 9, Falcon Heavy, and they fly more frequently than anyone else. They've pushed all the boundaries on reuse. I mean, these are the guys you would want to build your rocket, I would think, because they're obviously very freaking good at it. But anyway, I think, but because Starship is so ambitious, I think there are some questions about whether they get there. So if they actually get there with the orbital launch and start landing Starships, then that again really changes the conversation. I don't know if they'll get to that point. Maybe toward the end of next year, where they start to really land these things. And who knows? Maybe they'll do a Starlink launch by the end of next year. That'd be pretty incredible.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. The first cargo launch is a Starship to basically give it some missions would be Starlink, wouldn't it? It's obvious. but and they would launch a lot of Starlinks in one go. That'd be some way of achieving what they're looking for the constellation, the numbers in the constellation. So that makes sense. I just want to quickly bring up this video we're watching right now. Those are header tanks on the left-hand side. Those huge spears are literally the little tiny header tanks you see on the diagrams inside the methane and LOX, the top of the LOX, in fact, the very top of the nose cone. It's just surreal. We're watching.
There's like 3 of them there, right? I mean,
they're all outside as well. Though these domes are outside. The new design thrust pucks outside. I've never known anything like it. I remember shuttle parts used to come in on like environmentally controlled trucks and then brought into the OPFs, which are environmentally controlled, and FOD control and things like that. You couldn't even touch an orbiter. It is literally, and there's this guy here. There you go. Yeah. Literally just tugging around this header tank.
Look, they're just pushing it around.
Outside. Yeah. It's brilliant. It's these third eye things I keep talking about when Mary gets the videos. I mean, all praise to Mary again. I bring up on every stream, but I'm going to bring up on every stream. I don't care. Being out there all day, she's out there from dawn to dusk. And then, I mean, I don't know how many clips we got today, but there was 42 videos yesterday to put into the daily video we published last night. That's a lot of work and commitment being out there all the time. But the benefits pay off when you start seeing things like this and you capture raptors arriving, which is literally, they're only out in the open for like a minute and she gets every single one. So I find it completely surreal. I mean, I love it. Have we got any questions, Daz, by the way, before I interrupt any chat questions?
Chris, did you literally just ask me if we have any Starship-related questions?
Yeah, well, I know we do, but I'm thinking maybe you picked out a particular one in question.
Absolutely. I've got a whole stack of questions here. One specifically for Eric saying, how many uncrewed flights do you see Starship doing before it flies crew? When do you think they might get that? So when is very nebulous, but they've talked about that, where they're going to do crewed, or they're going to do cargo flights first, uncrewed Starship flights. How many of those do you think SpaceX wants to see before they put a human being on board?
This would be just a ballpark guess, but I'd say at least 50. I mean, you're going to want to be able to be pretty confident that the rocket not only takes off safely, but also lands. And as we're seeing with the Falcon 9 program, I mean, there are still, I mean, while they're damn good at landing those rockets on boats, they still have problems. And so I think they're going to want to fly it an awful lot before you get to propulsive landing. I mean, that was one of the big things. That was one of the big changes they made in the Crew Dragon program. You know, originally that vehicle was going to come back to Earth and land propulsively. And if you remember Elon's flashy event, I don't know, was it 2014, 2015, at the factory, where he said, this is how a 21st century spaceship should land, right? And they had to go away from that because NASA had concerns about, using the Super Dracos for propulsive landing, and just that added complexity to the system. So they're going to spend I think they'll fly Starship a long time before people get on it.
Yeah. Let's see. I'm just going to grab a couple more questions because we have an entire queue here. This is another specific one, and maybe you can talk about the role of the FAA versus the role of SpaceX here, but asking, I read that FAA completed the SN9 investigation. Do we know if FAA or SpaceX determined what the problem was with the landing or engine? So whose job is that? What does the FAA even care whether they landed or not?
So SpaceX would do that investigation. Likely someone from the FAA would be embedded, but then my general sense of how that would work is they would sort of prepare their report or do their analysis, and then they would do some kind of presentation with the FAA, and the FAA would take that and look at it and sort of basically, we concur with this finding, or we think that this wasn't, in depth enough, and we need to see more data on this. Yeah. It's different, of course, if you have a customer, because then your customer would be much more involved in the failure investigation. But in this case, I think they're sort of putting together a report, and the FAA is signing off on it, saying, yes, you've done everything you need to do to understand this problem and to take steps to fix it.
Gotcha. Let's see here. Do we know what corrective actions were agreed upon between FAA and SpaceX? Is there any information about that yet? Or is it just, we don't have clearance to fly SN, whatever's out there these days. SN10 is next.
No, I haven't seen anything that with specific detailed information on what went wrong with SN9, and that report could be made public if SpaceX wanted to make it public, but clearly
Gotcha.
they don't want to.
And I guess that's another good question. Like, oh, well, the FAA is a government agency. Why are these reports not public? Is that it's just a SpaceX report? They have to issue that to the FAA? Why wouldn't it then be available?
It's proprietary information that they have to comply with the government regulations to get these. I mean, you don't see the detailed information that Blue Origin files to get an FAA launch permit or ULA or anyone else. So it's just not for competitive purposes. They don't put it out there.
Yeah, gotcha. And Chris, you disappeared for a second. We'll resolve that. Stand by.
It's not like a ghostly background noise you want.
Well, no, you turned into a copy of the stream apparently, and we have to resolve that issue. Yeah,
probably, more more watchable.
Okay, we're good. Sorry about that. I don't even know how long that's been up there because it was so subtle. But there we go, all fixed. So let's grab a couple more questions. This is another good point I saw coming across chat. Isn't the key to a profitable system actually the booster? So why are they not focusing on the boosters first instead of the starships? Does that make sense that the boosters are more important? Is there any use?
So the answer to that is pretty clearly Elon thought that the Starship was the hardest piece of the puzzle. And so typically when he tries to solve problems, he goes after the hardest problem first to get that out of the way. And the fact of the matter is Starship is the most complex piece because there has never been a fully reusable orbital rocket, especially one that this big that comes back to land like this. And all of the new stuff for SpaceX really is in the upper stage, right? The trying to come back to the atmosphere from orbital velocity and land. I mean, if you ask Elon about it, he will say, well, the booster is just a dumb booster. It's easy. You know, we've done the Falcon 9, we've landed the Falcon 9. You know, there's more engines, but you know, it's and he will say that like, well, it's the same diameter as Starship, same kind of, you know, tanks, and so, you know, same fuel, same engines, and so everything we're learning on Starship has commonality with the super heavy booster. So I think there's some sense that the booster is much easier to do. So they're going to do Starship out, prove it out, and then because if they may do things with Starship and find that they need more power in the booster, they can make changes to the booster as a result of what they find with Starship.
Gotcha. Chris, we know from the videos that there are already booster segments. We can look into the high bay and see that there's boosters being stacked. When do you think we're going to start seeing some of those roll out? And do we expect the booster to fly from the existing test stands, or does the booster have to fly from the orbital launch platform?
There's several ways of looking at this. First of all, BN1 or B1, as some labels suggest. Well, we're going with BN1 for now. Is pretty much waiting for the next level of stacking, but we've seen sections going into the high bay yesterday in Mary's video last night, so they may be getting close to fully stacking this super heavy booster BN1. They've also got parts of BN2 already there. Now the thing why BN2 is already there is something we might see happening where BN1 is rolled out, which would be hilarious, by the way, seeing that roll out down Highway 4, rolled out to the launch site and put on either Pad A or Pad B the existing Starship mounts, and maybe just tested, just checked out, maybe not even fly. We don't know. It might do the hop. We'll know when they put Raptors in it. If they put 2 Raptors in it, which Elon's first suggested, that might be just a hop, or it might just be a static fire. If they put 4 Raptors into it, as the thrust puck has suggested, the thrust suggested there's a space for 4 engines, then maybe they'll take it on a larger hop. Maybe they'll refine things since, because the last time Elon spoke about the testing for BN1 was before SN8's flight. And SN8's flight went so well, even though it didn't land, it went so well, they may have advanced their test schedule for a Super Heavy BN1. We don't know, but we do know that's possible, especially with the amount of work that he's doing on the orbital site still yet, that BN1 could roll out just to Starship's launch site for testing, and then BN2 would be the flight booster.
They're also going to be changing those plans on almost a weekly basis.
Yeah.
So what he said 3 months ago really, I mean, it's good information, but it's probably changed as they sort of have figured out. Because if he hears a better idea for something, he'll be like, well, let's do that. You know, he's not wedded to any.
Like turning on all 3 engines?
Yeah, right.
Do you think that was a serious thing, or was he being like tongue-in-cheek? Do you think they looked at that and said, no, here's a reason not to do that? Or what do you think his read on that was?
I have found that typically when he says stuff about his rockets on SpaceX, he's on Twitter, he's serious. I remember when it was late at night that he announced that he was going to launch the Tesla Roadster on the Falcon Heavy mission. And when I first saw that, I said, that's a joke. And I emailed him and he said, no, that's serious. So I tend to take him at face value on what he tweets.
Fair enough. All right. And again, there's all sorts of different questions over here. I can keep asking questions. I know we've got about 20 minutes left here, and we wanted to get into some of the history of SpaceX. So if we want, I don't know exactly how y'all want to run that, but we can
I'll
certainly
do history next, and we can come back to pick up any questions. Probably maybe some related questions to that.
Yeah.
To finish off with.
So honestly, I don't even know how to particularly introduce that because nobody shipped me a copy of the book.
I got a copy.
So Chris, you're going to need to take that one away. So
Back to the Future, where his book arrives, and he's got this brilliant picture of himself. That's it. If I ever bring out a book, I want to do a George McFly pose for my picture on the back.
That's good.
Let's just get into this book because the title gives it away, shall we say? It says Eric Berger, Liftoff, Elon Musk and the desperate early days that launched SpaceX. This is not a fan letter book, is it, Eric? This is a serious what Elon had to go through to make SpaceX get off the ground and keep it going through the challenges of the early days and to get to where they are now. So yeah, you can preface your own book here, Eric, by saying, how much of a challenge this was for him.
Yeah, it was. No company had ever developed a orbital liquid fueled rocket before SpaceX. No private company had done that with private money. There had been lots of efforts that had failed, and I talk about some of them in the book, but it really was audacious in 2002 to found a company and say, we're going to put a rocket into space. And that's ultimately what they did, and it was extraordinarily difficult. And Elon's story is pretty well known. The biography that Ashley Vance, a friend of mine, wrote about him in 2014 is excellent. Although Elon and Gwen Shotwell are not huge fans of that book, but it is quite a good character assessment of Elon and sort of his life. But I was more interested in really understanding how SpaceX had succeeded, where these other companies that had tried to do this had failed, and why they succeeded. And so in 2018, I went to Elon and I said, I think it would be good to tell the story of the origin of SpaceX and sort of how you went through those 3 launches. There were 3 launches of the Falcon 1 rocket. They each failed for different reasons. And then the 4th rocket, with everything riding on it, the fate of the company, made it to orbit. And he said, yeah, okay, talk to whoever you want. And so I got to go out to the factory and interview people who were there, and I got in touch with former employees. And so I talked to all the early vice president, all their sort of deputies, and a lot of other people to sort of understand, sort of to tell the story through sort of both Elon and sort of some of the key people who helped him carry out that vision.
There's a wonderful thing about that as well there. I didn't realize that Hans introduced Gwen. Basically, he was responsible for bringing Gwen in almost by having lunch with her and selling SpaceX to her, which I had no idea about, by the way. I thought Elon had hired Gwen just from like looking on whatever LinkedIn pages for executives or something like that. That was from basically how Gwen got involved with SpaceX. And how important is Gwen with SpaceX now?
Oh, she's essential. I mean, she was, even back then, she had come from. She had a lot of government contact when she was at the Aerospace Corporation and then at Microsoft, and so she knew all the industry players, and she was kind of on the inside, and Elon was on the outside. But what's really cool about them is that while they're both totally different people, and like everyone loves Gwen, and everyone thinks Elon's pretty controversial in aerospace or the space industry, like they have very much the same mindset. They are both out there, sort of locked arm in arm, trying to disrupt the industry. But yeah, she was essential early on in terms of selling the rocket, and two contracts from NASA basically saved the company. They got one in 2006 that really allowed them to grow and expand and sort of help them weather the 3 failures. And then after the successful flight, they still didn't have any money. They didn't have any launch contracts with the Falcon 1, and so the NASA contract for cargo supply to station save the company. And she was responsible for leading both of those efforts to win those contracts.
And you say you spoke to a lot of people at SpaceX. You're not joking. I picked up every name I pretty much know from SpaceX. There's Tom Muller, there's Thompson there, there's Hans there, there's Gwen there. It's not just about Elon. It's not just like you've sat down with Elon for 30 minutes and just basically made a book out of it. How many hours have you put into this? Speaking to them, just interviewing them.
Well, lots of days in person, and then lots of phone interviews. I mean, I don't know, hundreds of hours.
Literally, must be, yeah.
Yeah.
But one thing I'd like to bring up as well is that it's Tom Muller, who is literally, everybody who's into SpaceX knows who he is. He is like the engine guy. He's like everyone knows. It's literally got a lot of Tom Muller's background in it, which I had no clue about. Because a lot of people, when they get to know names like Hans and Tom Muller and people Gwen, they know them from when they started with SpaceX. They don't have any history of behind what they've come through to get into the position of being hired by SpaceX and then being a success at it. So how do you find Tom Muller? Because he's quite an enigma. He's like a racing car guy, racing bike driver, whatever, isn't he, on Twitter? We don't know what he's like. What's he like in person?
He's very laid back. I mean, he's. You know, I talked to him in 2019. He was essentially retired for SpaceX. As he told me back in 2014 when he's stepped down as like head of propulsion, whatever. He said, "Yeah, they gave me a bullshit title to keep the customers happy, but I was out." He has a fascinating personal story. I mean, he was a lumberjack, right, to pay for his way through college in Idaho, and wanted to work on rocket engines, and so moved to LA with his girlfriend, and actually I think it was his wife at that time. Lived with his mother-in-law, and just started, like, he told me he was getting magazines and like space magazines and like applying to jobs. And obviously was this brilliant guy. And one of my favorite stories in the book is how, like, he'd been at TRW for a while, had gotten a really good reputation of building engines, and he and John Garvey were working on this 12,000 pound thrust private engine in a workspace Garvey had. And he met Elon when Elon came by one Saturday. Like, he and his wife at the time, Justine, were going out, and like they're all dressed up, and Tom Muller and John Garvey are sort of sweaty and dirty and muscling this engine onto the test stand. And Elon walks in and says, "Well, how cheap could you make a big engine?" and this kind of thing. And he's like, "Well, we got to go. We got these plans, but can we get together next weekend?" And Tom had just bought a 55-inch HD TV, and this is back in the spring January of 2002. And so it was, HD TVs were a brand new thing. And it was for the first time, Super Bowl was in widescreen. He's like, "Well, I'm having this party at my house to watch the Super Bowl." And Elon's like, "Okay, great. I'll come over." And Elon comes over, and they watch one play, and then the rest of it's just talking about the rockets. So great story. He's a great storyteller. Is how I found him. And so, yeah, with the book, I try to introduce people to not just, Tom and Hans and Gwen kind of telling their stories of where they come from, but also other people who, I don't think most people have heard of Ann Chinnery. Who was this, played this important role of helping them get to quadrillion, or Zach Dunn, who is this, this unbelievable engineer who was the guy who crawled inside the Falcon 1 first stage when it was imploding at 35,000 feet as they were transporting across the ocean, and sort of saved the day by opening a pressure valve. Or Florence Lee. I mean, there's like about 10 or 12 people I really try to sort of bring to life.
You've got like an epilogue at the back of the book where it goes through all these people, which a lot of people have not heard of. I think that's a lovely touch as well. Just bring it. But it's obviously good. Are you going to do a part 2? Because I know it's prefaced by Starhopper. So you do cover where they are now and how they got to these silver rockets, as we say. But it must, Elon, the way in SpaceX are going as well, there must be another part coming where maybe in like 5 years' time, you'll write a second part.
I'd like to write a part about the Falcon 9, basically going from sort of their first tests in 2008 to flying humans in 2020, because I think I'd love to know more about how they really made reuse happen, because come on, it's ridiculous, right? You see all those exploding rockets, the Grasshopper tests, and I try to tell liftoff through the human stories, to just sort of like all the crap that they had to deal with to make this happen. So I'd like to sort of find those same stories and do the same kind of thing for Falcon 9, because I think that's obviously an incredible rocket. And then maybe one day the Mars book. But I mean, about Starship. But that story, we're still at the beginning of that story.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think that's a long time off.
I tell you what, that surprised me actually. I didn't realize that SpaceX got involved with McGregor so early. I thought that came a lot later for some reason. I thought it came way after Falcon 1. And I'm going to bring up, almost like you should bring this up yourself, Eric, but I'm going to bring up anyway because I found it hilarious, is where Chris Thompson's talking about they're in a countdown for Falcon 1. And Elon, being his multitasking brain kind of person, was literally like beckoning him over to ask him about Falcon 5. And then I remember Falcon 5. Was Falcon 5 the one that was going to go on stratolaunch, kind of air launch vehicle?
Yeah, that was one of the commercial applications they were looking for with Falcon 5, and they ultimately gave it up because they got the NASA contract. So yeah, it was the first launch in March of 2006, the very first Falcon 1 launch. And Chris Thompson, who by the way is now the conductor at Astra. So he was in the control room at Astra, but he is the test conductor or the launch conductor in sitting in a control room in Kwajalein. They're counting down like 20 minutes to go before their very first launch attempt. And Elon walks over and he's like, Thompson says, we're having this very aggressive conversation about ordering aluminum for the structure for Falcon 5. And he's like, every command that goes to the rocket is relayed through me. And what? So he says, so Elon sort of comes over and does that, and he walks away. And Tim Buzza, who was the launch director, Buzza was a fabulous source for the book, by the way. He's at Relativity Space now. Buzza says, what the hell was that? But that's how Elon's mind works. I'll tell you another story. In 2018, the day before the Falcon Heavy launch, a few reporters got to go out to the launch pad, and Elon came along in his SUV. He and some of his sons had gone up and looked at the rocket, and were coming back by. And so, I'm standing there with the Falcon Heavy and about a half mile behind me, and he kind of comes up to do an interview. And the first thing he says is we're looking off at the Falcon Heavy rocket is, looks a little small, doesn't it? And I don't know what the hell to think about that, because it's like the biggest rocket in the world. And I'm thinking, is it was that self-deprecation? Was he joking? No, he was being serious. He was about to launch the Falcon Heavy for the first time, biggest rocket in the world. His Tesla was sitting inside of it, and his mind was on Starship, because he was even, in 2018, he was sort of in planning meetings all the time, working on Starship design. And when you stack up Falcon Heavy against Starship, it does look small.
Yeah.
But he's always looking forward.
The thing I got the impression from the book is it's honest. It's honesty in the way that other people describe him as well. He's driven. He's multitasking. He knows how to be successful, but he's ruthless as well. I mean, the story about the intern, you didn't go into depth about, but this intern obviously wasn't there a day later, where that intern made a mistake, shall we say, because I know you said in the book that the person didn't want to be named in it, but you've got to be. You can't be this lovely, happy kind of guy who does memes on Twitter and be a successful person in a multi-billion-dollar industry. So, how did he come across to you? Did he come across as, that kind of special kind of mentality where you can tell he's being successful because the way he acts and the way he does things?
So, I mean, I haven't spent days and days and days. It's not like I'm bosom buddies with Elon, but I've spent some time with him. So he is always himself. He's nerdy. He's a dad. He's this brilliant engineer, and he's this, ruthless leader of employees. He's all of these things.
Yeah.
But he does create this intense work environment, right? One of the things that he was really good at was not just hiring brilliant people and sort of getting them to want to come work for him, because he was very good at that. As I say in the book, he personally hired the first 3,000 engineers at SpaceX.
Yeah.
But he also could find the people who would be willing to give their all to the company, because there's more work-life balance at SpaceX today than there was in 2004, say. But back then it was like 80-hour weeks. Like he drove them super hard, but at the same time he found people who wanted to, who were committed to that. So who more or less willingly sort of gave themselves over to those goals and accomplished that. But he is an extremely demanding employer. Like, and as Bob Reagan, who was he was this machinist who they brought in-house, told me, he said, if you tell Elon you're going to do something, you better damn well do it. So, but yeah, I mean, the other impressive thing about me that came through time and time again is how much pressure he is constantly applying to move things forward. Like, he's just constantly driving. So one of the things I did is I sat in on a meeting where they were discussing how they were going to test Raptor engines for Starship. And this was in September of 2019. So he's got a meeting. He's got his Raptor team in his executive conference room there in Hawthorne, and they're talking about, he wanted to use the Falcon 9 tower in McGregor, and he said use it. I mean, that's the best thing we've got, because they wanted to build these bump stands and put them maybe in Boca Chica, and he's like, no, and he's like, they're like, well, the Falcon 9 really shook the hell out of it, and the funicular that goes up the side of it, is broken, and we're not sure about it. And he's like, no, get a construction elevator out there. We can get people to go out there and fix it. And he gave them, this was on a Friday, and he wanted them to have the construction elevator out there on Monday to sort of be testing all this out. And he's like, let's see where we are on Monday and then make a final decision, but give yourself 72 hours, right? to do this. And he's like, if you're having trouble finding this elevator or whatever, email me and I'll call him, because he's like, just email me and I'll take care of it. So it's just constant. Like,
that's nuts, because that's the tripod stand at McGregor, isn't it? That's a tripod.
Yeah, the tripod. He's like the tripod. He said it's a kick-ass. The tripod is kick-ass. The tripod is kick-ass. And that's the best place to test it. And you can put multiple engines up there, and we're going to use the tripod. And they've ended up using the tripod, I think.
Yeah.
So.
That's kind of the proof in the pudding, that he's pushed them. He's had this idea. He's pushed it for probably some resistance to it, but the ultimate end game is it's worked. He's got Raptors up there on the tripod stand.
No, it was great. It was great because there was a speakerphone in the middle of the table in the room, and so he's sitting at one end of this U-shaped table, and you can hear the McGregor engineers on the other end of the line, and they're like, well, we don't really think we should do this. It wouldn't be a good idea. And he's like, no, you've got to use a tripod. He had just made up his mind, and ultimately that's what worked. So, yeah. But you could hear the hesitation in their voice, like, oh no, here we go.
You want to go against the boss? Who wants to stand up and say something? No, you're all right. We'll do it.
That actually does. Yeah, actually, I was going to say that brings us right into a good segue for a couple questions here as we approach the end of the stream. And we've been talking about Starship, and we've been talking about the development, and you were just talking about the history of SpaceX and the story about the tripod, the test stand out there. And there was a question in chat about hardware rich. We have all of these Starships just waiting in line to fly. What about the Raptors? Do we feel like engine development, engine testing is something that may slow the program down? Are they spooling that up? How is that going to impact the flight rate?
So he has been extremely focused on Raptor development and then getting the foundry to the point where they can build, multiple engines a week. And while I think one of the things that Chris talked about was how many engines is he going to put on the first booster,
right? And
because he really doesn't want to lose those engines, right? Because they're still kind of like a precious commodity, and they've had some issues in terms of of scaling up development. But now they've got dozens of engines. I think they're sort of really starting to hit their stride on Raptor engines, and that will become a problem with diminishing returns.
Gotcha.
Problem will get less and less.
All right, and I really want to sort of tie everything together with this last.
And just by the way, the idea of building 50 engines in a year or in a year and a half that they've done, I mean, that's insane. And these are huge engines, right? I mean, who does that? I mean, no one. I mean, it's just crazy.
What a problem to have. It's like our huge booster is going to require this many engines. You got to be able to build all these engines. So
28.
Yeah. No kidding. I wanted to sort of tie everything together because we've talked about Perseverance landing on Mars, and we talked about SLS or orange rockets that may take the places to the moon or something, and we're talking about Starship here and the history of SpaceX, how we've gotten to this. And so this question sort of ties everything together. But do we think that there's some potential that information found by Perseverance may kickstart funding or progress towards Mars? So we saw there's some interesting rocks there. Did they land on a coral reef? Is that an igneous rock, or what did they land on? What is the possibility, like if Perseverance looks at the ground and says that is a fossilized piece of coral, do we think that that'll change the pace, or is it just SpaceX is already going? They already have their foot on the accelerator. What do we think? How do we think Perseverance might impact development schedules?
I think finding something strong indicative of past life would be a useful driver in terms of because one of the big questions right now is why should we send humans to Mars? Like, what's the point? You've already got very capable rovers there, that kind of thing. But if there was some really existential question, like, are we really alone, or was life passed on Mars, or did life on Earth come from Mars?
Yep. And
we really need to send more science there and like actually have people there to probe into these questions. I think that would be super helpful. But if it continues to find evidence of a cold, dead world, then that would not be helpful.
Yeah, and that might tie into what you were talking about earlier. There are all these other systems, these discrete closed-loop systems that need to be developed. And SpaceX is sort of pedal to the metal. I mean, Elon wants to put stainless steel on Mars, but if there's some big evidence that comes back from the rover, it may be easier to get funding for these other systems, maybe other companies, maybe NASA throws their bigger hat into the ring or whatever, because all of a sudden we have a really good reason to get to Mars to study this stuff, as opposed to, like you said, another cold, dead world. We might as well just go hang out on the moon, right?
I think it may help, too, if China starts beaming back pictures of its rover from the surface of Mars. Yeah. That might be a geopolitical driver to really get sort of an international human program to Mars.
Good deal. Well, as always, we could sit here and we could talk about random space stuff across the board for hours and hours, but we have got to the end of our show. I wanted to hit this one more time just because a ton of people were asking. We were talking about the book, and this was, Eric, you said this was the U.S. version of the cover that I've got up there. And you've got a U.K. version. What is it, written in an accent or what, Chris? Does it talk about biscuits?
It's written for Yorkshire people. It goes, SpaceX,
just the way that it's distributed, I guess it's two different locations, right, Eric? Is that just a different cover?
It's HarperCollins in the U.S. It's William Collins in U.K. and they each have different covers, and there'll be different covers in the Chinese version and the Korean version and Japanese and all these other.
Nice.
Coming.
Yeah, makes sense. So not quite out yet, even though you've got a stack of them on your desk. I see those.
Yep, March 2nd.
So March 2nd.
Soon.
All right. And you'll be able to...
Where can you buy them from, Eric?
Anywhere.
Anywhere. Any reputable bookstore.
Any reputable bookstore. You could go down to Waterstones and get a copy on March 2nd, or you can buy it on Amazon here in the United States or Barnes & Noble or wherever. It should be distributed everywhere.
Yeah. There's links in chat. There we go.
Yeah, good deal. And just hearing some of the stories, like the anecdotal sort of things from the people you were embedded with at SpaceX, just getting all those background stories, that's some of the greatest things to hear. We all see the rocket launches, and we're all like, yeah, look at that cool thing go. But to hear the stories from the people that made it all happen is really an important thing to just make sure you understand. It's an interesting thing to be able to keep up with. So that is going to bring us to the end of our NASA Spaceflight Live show today. As always, there's no way that we can get through every single question. Tons of good questions in chat over here. Tried to get through a lot of them, tried to roll some of them together and stuff like that. But folks, again, over on the very, oops, I pointed the wrong way. I never do that. Over on the very edge of the screen, Eric, thank you so much, Eric Berger, for joining us here today on NASA Spaceflight Live. We appreciate you. Thank you so much.
I had a ball. Could talk space all day, too.
All right. Good deal. And again, y'all be looking for the book. Follow Eric on Twitter. If you are interested in keeping up with space, he is absolutely one of the forefront reporters keeping track of what's going on with SpaceX and rockets and every different thing that you might be interested in. So also with us today was, which way is the right way to point? Okay, right here. I'm going to push Chris into the center of the, I wish I had this movie magic thing where I could push him into the center of his camera. Chris Bergin, thank you so much.
Still. I just cannot sit down, keep still anywhere.
Well, I was joking in the back channel. I'm going to have to install a robotic camera in your office so I can track you moving around in your chair.
By the way, seriously, it's a great book, Eric. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier, but it is a great book, and I wouldn't say that if it wasn't. I'd just say, thanks for coming on, Eric. It is a great book. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
Excellent. So, again, y'all, that is going to bring us to the end of NASA Spaceflight Live for today. I want to do a big shout out to the members, everybody who makes this possible. Michael. Paging Michael. The member screen is apparently blank right now. Not sure what's good. Well, I guess everybody is no longer a member of the channel. They've just up and left. Okay, let's just get off that scene really quickly. Interestingly, the member list tried to refresh and went away. But anyways, if you're
the member list is so long now, it's probably broken it.
It might have. That's right. We used to read them out when we first started doing this. Like, thank you, like 3 names. And now it's over hundreds of names. There's no way we can read it. It may have overflowed the buffer or something like that. Oh, refresh the cache. All right, fine. I can refresh the cache. Let me see if that comes up. Nope, still broken, Michael. There may be something we need to look at there. But anyways, thank you to our members, everybody that shows up to the streams to make these things possible. Our special guest, Eric, again, thank you so much for joining us. Fantastic to have you here. And then also be looking for us next week, because we do have some Starship testing scheduled. We've got road closures out at Boca Chica starting on Monday. We're going to be looking for the notices that the residents get. So if we get that overpressure notice from Mary, we'll be covering live tests out there here on the same channel. So if you haven't yet, make sure you toss a follow, subscription, turn on the bell, whatever it is I don't know, whatever it is you do so you don't miss cool things we do. But for now, we are going to go ahead and end NASA Spaceflight Live. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see y'all next time. Propulsion continues to be normal.
All right, the chamber pressure looks good.
Following up. Roger, roll, Atlantic. Flight outside SE off. Off.
Yikes. You bet. Okay. We don't need any more of these.